The first snow of the season came early, howling in from the north like a warning. By the first week of November, Broken Rock Pass was already buried beneath a thick, merciless sheet of white. The wind screamed between the pines, tore at the rooftops, and coated the world in silence. Most folks in the valley had long since shut their doors, stacked their firewood, and prayed for an easy winter. But one man stayed out. He moved through the snow like a ghost, slow, steady, unbothered. Tall as a pine and twice as gnarled, his figure cut a solitary path through the drifts, wrapped in a thick buffalo hide coat and a silence all his own. They called him Giant Apache, though whether the name came from his blood, his build, or the fear he once carried in battle, no one could say for sure. His real name had been spoken once. Long ago, and maybe by a mother, maybe by a wife, but time had swallowed it, same as it had swallowed most everything else he'd once cared about. He lived alone in a crooked wooden shack high on the ridge, where the wind never rested and the wolves still sang at night. His only companions were a scarred tomahawk hanging above the hearth, a mule named Ghost who had more miles in his bones than any man alive, and the kind of past that sat heavy on a soul. The kind that didn't leave, even when you begged it to. No one came up to that shack unless they were lost, dying, or too dumb to know better. There were stories, of course, whispers passed around campfires and in the back corners of saloons. Some said he was a killer turned hermit. Others said he'd once fought off a dozen bounty hunters with just a hatchet and bad intentions. A few even claimed he could speak to the animals or vanish into the trees when danger came calling. But in truth, he was just tired. Not the kind of tired that sleep could fix. No, he was soul tired. The kind of tired that came from outliving too many people you once loved. From doing things you couldn't ever undo. From carrying scars deeper than the skin. He didn't write. He didn't pray. He didn't drink. He just was. Each morning, he fed Ghost and cleared the snow from the shed's roof. He chopped firewood even though he had enough to last 2 winters. He walked the same stretch of ridge until the sun dipped behind the trees, always scanning the horizon, though he couldn't have said why. Maybe he was waiting for something. Or maybe just watching the world pass by without him. The snow kept falling. The fire kept burning, and still, he stayed. If you'd asked him why he never left, why he didn't take what was left of his bones and settle in a warmer place where people smiled and said good morning, he might have looked at you for a long moment, then turned away without answering. Because the truth was simple. Even if it hurt, there was no place left for him to go. But fate, as it tends to do, had other plans, and one cold evening, as the snow thickened and the wind began to howl like a dying coyote, something strange broke the stillness on the ridge. A sound. A voice. A knock at the door. And for the first time in many years, Giant Apache turned toward it, not with suspicion, but with something far more dangerous. Hope. The storm hit hard on the 4th day, hard enough to erase tracks, bury fences, and shatter tree limbs like brittle bones. The world shrank to white. Even the wolves went quiet. Giant Apache was splitting logs when he heard something, not loud, not panicked, just a sound out of place in a place where sound didn't belong. A crunching of snow, a dragging, then a pause, like someone gathering the strength to keep moving. He squinted through the snowfall, body tense, hand drifting toward the tomahawk resting near the chopping block. That's when he saw her. A figure limping through the whiteout, wrapped in a faded gray coat dusted with frost. Her bonnet was soaked through, the cloth heavy and sagging with snow. Her boots were old, town-worn, not trail-worn, and they sank deep with every step. She was carrying something wrapped in a quilt, clutching it tight to her chest. He didn't move. Just watched, studied. She stopped 10 feet from him, chest heaving, lips trembling, and eyes wide with something older than fear, determination, or maybe despair. "I won't survive a second night out there," she said, her voice cracking like ice underfoot. "I won't even survive another hour." Her face was pale, but her eyes held the fire of someone who had buried too many and wasn't ready to become one more name in the snow. He didn't answer. Just opened the cabin door and stepped aside. She passed him slowly, like a deer unsure of whether the wolf was gone or simply resting. As she crossed the threshold, the warmth of the hearth wrapped around her like an old memory. She let the bundle in her arms slide to the floor, Not a baby, not food, just a worn leather satchel with patches and stitching that told its own story. He shut the door behind her. The storm howled outside, but the silence between them was heavier. Name? He asked. Mercy Quinn, she said. Widow, midwife, walker of poor decisions. He almost smiled. Almost. Yours? She asked, looking at him not with fear but curiosity. They call me Giant Apache. I figured, she said, pulling off her wet gloves. Her fingers were blue at the tips. Didn't seem like a Tom or a Bill. He moved to the hearth and threw on more wood. The fire popped and hissed. Outside, the wind screamed against the walls, trying to get in. She lowered herself to the floor beside the warmth, boots steaming. I had a wagon, she said softly, staring into the flame. Broke down 2 ridges east. Horses died in the night. Driver ran off or froze. I didn't check too hard. I just walked, he nodded once. No questions, no pity. Just understanding. You picked a bad time to travel, he said. I didn't have a good time to wait. She took a locket from her pocket. Brass, tarnished. She didn't open it, just held it in her palm like a weight she'd grown used to carrying. Don't mean to impose, she added as the fire warmed her face. But you've got a roof and I've still got breath. Thought maybe that was enough to make a deal. He stared at her a long time. The storm wailed again, and the shadows flickered on the log walls like ghosts. Finally, he nodded toward the second chair by the fire. No deal, he said gruffly. Just sit. And for the first time in years, there were 2 chairs filled in the cabin on the ridge. The cabin walls creaked through the night, wind pressing in from every side like the fingers of the dead. Snow piled against the windows, blocking out the moon, the trees, the world. Inside, the fire cracked steady and low, the only heartbeat the room seemed to have. Mercy Quinn sat hunched near the hearth, her boots off, thick wool socks drying on a nearby stool. Her coat steamed, and her gray hair, damp from melted frost, clung to her cheeks. She held her hands to the fire, not for warmth, but as if trying to feel something she hadn't in a long while. Giant Apache sat across from her, arms crossed, his shadow dancing behind him on the log wall. He hadn't asked more questions. He didn't need to. People like him knew when to listen and when to leave the past where it lay. Still, silence can only last so long before memory starts speaking for you. You fought in the war, she said suddenly, not looking at him. Didn't you? He didn't answer right away. His eyes flicked to the tomahawk above the mantel. Old, worn smooth from 1,000 battles, the blade still sharp. I was young, he said finally. Too young to understand. Too old now to forget, Mercy nodded. Same. She reached into her satchel and pulled out a small flask. Not liquor, but an herbal tea that smelled faintly of sage and pine bark. She sipped it slow, hands shaking from more than just cold. I was a field nurse, she said. Lost count how many boys I patched up. Most didn't make it anyway. Kept their letters. Wrote to their mamas when I could. Kind thing to do, Apache said. No, she replied, eyes hardening. It was selfish. I couldn't save them, so I tried to save their stories. Tried to feel useful. But you do that long enough. The grief soaks in deep. Turns to rot, he nodded once, slow. They both understood the weight of lives you couldn't carry forever. Outside, a tree cracked and fell in the distance, a long, slow groan followed by the thud of surrender. Why the locket? He asked, surprising even himself. She looked down at it in her lap. Her fingers closed around it. My boy, she said quietly. Born in winter. Died in winter? Never got to bury him. The locket's all I had left. That, and the waiting. What were you waiting for? Her lips quivered, but she didn't cry. I don't know. Maybe just a place to stop. Maybe someone who'd let me sit by the fire without asking too much. He leaned forward, stoked the embers with a metal rod, and let the flames rise a little higher. You can sit here as long as you need, he said. She looked at him, really looked. There was something old in his eyes. Older than pain. Older than regret. Something she recognized. Something she'd seen in the mirror night after night. We're strangers, she said, voice soft. We're not, he replied. Not anymore. And in that tiny cabin on the ridge, surrounded by wind and wolves and the ghosts of who they used to be, 2 people who had lived too long and lost too much shared something rare. Silence without loneliness. They didn't talk again that night. Didn't need to. The fire did the speaking. The storm did the rest, and outside, in the endless snow, winter raged on. But inside, for the first time in years, something warm had begun to take root. The days passed with little said and much understood. The kind of quiet only two tired souls could share without it feeling empty. They moved like pieces in a slow, solemn dance. He chopped wood. She dried herbs and stitched threadbare clothing. Both kept the fire fed like it was the only thing still alive. It was Mercy who heard them first. Late one night, just after supper, she paused mid-step near the door. "Did you hear that?" Giant Apache set down his tin cup and turned toward the window. The wind had gone still and the trees stood silent. But beneath that silence was breath. Soft and rhythmic, then came the low, dragging growl. Not a dog, not a coyote. Wolves. He stepped outside, no coat, no hat, just instinct. The snow crunched underfoot, hard-packed and cruel. The moon cast pale light across the ridge, and he saw them. 5. No, 6. Stalking just at the edge of the tree line. Their coats were thick with frost, ribs showing under winter hunger. Desperate. Focused. They'd caught the scent of food. Mule, maybe. Or something warmer. Something weaker. Mercy. He turned back to the cabin, grabbed the tomahawk from above the door. It was old, but cared for. Sharpened weakly. He gripped it tight in his weathered hand. "Stay inside," he told her. I said stay." She froze in the doorway. He stepped forward, alone, into the white. The wolves crept closer. No sound but the crunch of snow under their padded feet and the quiet whisper of breath through sharp teeth. He let out a breath and squared his stance. The lead wolf lunged, fast. Too fast for something half-starved. Apache twisted, brought the tomahawk up, and it met flesh with a wet crack. The animal dropped without a sound. 2 more came from the flank, coordinated like they'd hunted men before. He spun and caught one in the neck, but the second sank its teeth deep into his side. Pain flared hot and fast. He didn't yell. He didn't fall. He drove an elbow back, broke bone. The wolf released. Blood steamed against the snow. Behind him, the mule shrieked. From the cabin, Mercy burst through the door. Iron poker gripped in her hands like a weapon forged in fury. "Apache!" she cried, but he was already stumbling. The cold digging into the wound like teeth. The last wolf lunged for her, and with a roar that echoed across the pass, he threw the tomahawk. It spun once, twice, and struck dead center. The beast dropped mid-air. Mercy gasped. Chest heaving, the surviving wolves turned, heads low, and slipped back into the trees like shadows, dragging their dead. Then, silence again. She ran to him, caught his arm as he fell to one knee. "You're bleeding," he shook his head. "It's not deep." She ignored the lie and pulled him toward the door. "Come inside." They collapsed near the fire. She wrapped his side with torn linen and stitched what she could with trembling fingers. His jaw clenched through the pain. "You saved me," she whispered, voice trembling. "Why?" He looked at her. "Not her hands, not the wound, but her. I don't know," he said. "But I'd do it again." The fire burned low as the storm passed quietly overhead. Outside, the wild remained cruel. But inside, something had changed. Not spoken, not clear, but real. Not survival. Something more. The storm passed by morning, but the silence it left behind was even heavier than before. Giant Apache stepped outside, slower than usual. His side ached beneath the bandages Mercy had tied, but he didn't complain. Pain, after all, was just a whisper compared to the roar of the past. The snow had swallowed the trail of blood, both his and the wolves'. The only sign of the fight was the half-frozen body he dragged away from the mule's pen. A single wolf, its fur matted and stiff. He buried it near the tree line without ceremony. Some things deserved to rest. Even the wild ones. When he returned to the cabin, Mercy was sitting by the window, holding a battered tin cup and staring out over the ridge. Her locket dangled from one hand, open now, the first time he'd seen what was inside. 2 faces. A man, stern-eyed and mustached. A child, no older than 5. "They're both gone," she said softly, not turning to look at him. He didn't ask who they were. He already knew. Grief has a shape, and that shape never changes. "I buried my husband in Missouri," she continued. eyes fixed on something far away. The boy. He didn't make it through his 7th winter. Fever hit him fast. I was out tending to another birth. By the time I got home, he was cold. Apache nodded slowly. No words. Just respect. I never forgave myself, she said. He sat across from her at the table. His hands were cracked and raw from the cold, the veins raised like tree roots. He looked down at them for a long time before speaking. I lost 3, he said finally. Wife, 2 girls. Mercy's gaze shifted to him, searching, but he wasn't looking back. He was staring at the wall, or maybe through it. White men came through the valley back in the early days. Railroad scouts. Thought I was a threat, thought I was wild. Thought wrong, his jaw clenched. They didn't live long enough to explain themselves. Mercy's hand moved slowly across the table and rested on his. Not a word. Not a question. Just a human hand on another. Warm, steady, present. I buried them out back, he said after a moment. Marked the stones, but the names faded. I used to repaint them every spring. Do you still? No, he said. Not for a long time. But I still remember where they are. I still talk to him sometimes. Especially when the nights get long. Mercy squeezed his hand. I'd like to leave something there, she said. If that's all right. He didn't answer right away. Then he nodded once, slow and firm. That afternoon, they walked out together behind the cabin. The wind had softened, and the sun cast a thin gold light over the snow-covered ridge. 3 stones sat half-buried in white, tilted, worn smooth by time and weather. No names, just presence. Mercy knelt, pulled a small bundle from her coat, the locket. She kissed it once, then placed it gently at the foot of the center stone. I've been carrying them too long, she whispered. It's time they had a place to rest. Apache watched in silence. His breath steamed in the cold air. For the first time in years, the weight in his chest shifted, not gone, but lighter, shared. They stood there a while. 2 old souls among the dead saying nothing. Sometimes, the things we bury aren't just names or bones. Sometimes, they're pieces of ourselves we were never brave enough to lay down. But now, at last, they had begun. The days grew shorter, the cold sharper. The sun barely broke through the heavy gray skies, hanging low like a pale coin behind a veil of clouds. Outside, the ridge lay silent beneath an endless blanket of snow. But inside the cabin, something was stirring, something neither giant Apache nor Mercy Quinn dared to name. They moved around each other like old ghosts, careful and quiet. The shared silences had become softer, less like walls and more like unspoken promises. But beneath the calm, the weight of years and regret pressed down harder than the winter's frost. One evening, the fire sputtered low, casting long shadows on the log walls. Mercy sat near the hearth, knitting slowly with trembling fingers. Apache stood by the window staring out at the frozen landscape, hands clenched behind his back. The air between them was thick with things unsaid. Finally, Mercy broke the silence. Do you ever wonder if we waited too long? Her voice was barely above a whisper. He didn't turn. What do you mean? She set her knitting aside, eyes searching his face in the flickering firelight. For love. For someone to want us after all the years. After all we've lost, Apache sighed, the sound heavy and full of memories. I stopped hoping a long time ago. Too many ghosts follow me to believe in anything else. She reached out, brushing a loose strand of hair from his forehead. Maybe we don't have to fight those ghosts anymore. He looked down at her hand, then met her gaze. There was something fragile there. A flicker of hope, maybe, or the courage to try again. The silence stretched between them, waiting. Then, as if the winter itself had broken through the cabin walls, Apache stepped forward and took Mercy's hand in his. It's been a long road, he said quietly. But maybe we're not too old for this. She smiled then, small, but real. And the warmth between them rivaled the fire. Outside, the wind picked up, howling around the cabin, but inside, the storm had passed. For the first time in years, 2 lonely hearts found a reason to keep beating.